Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy and today we're looking at the end times. Now this was a suggestion that came through from our Facebook group as to how to handle that tricky phase of leading up to the end times. So the actual event itself, the cataclysmic event that is going to decimate your setting, decimate your world, how do we get there and how do we play through that moment until we get to the other side? So we're not talking post-apocalyptic, we are talking apocalyptic. And so if we look at the options that we have or the ideas that we should be looking at, we should look at the event itself, we should look at rising destruction, that's going to be something that's going to evolve over time, leaks and cracks, what starts to cause all of these problems, small victories versus big failures, because that's important to keep our players engaged, time frames, and of course the actual event itself, or the event, and then hope after the event. So these are things that we're going to be keeping in the backs of our minds as we go through today's video, because these are the rallying points, I think, that will help give you guidance as to how to construct your end time event. So if we go one day, I'll get this right. I know that people are worried it's distracting. There we go. Right. So the event itself. Now, there are two facets to consider when it comes to the event. Is it natural or is it man-made or elf-made or dwarf-made or dragon-made or alien-made? What is that apocalyptic event? Now, the reason why we have to ask that is because if it's natural, if it's a volcanic eruption, if it's an asteroid impact, if it's anything along those lines, it changes the focus of the story. And the reason for that is because it is a non-malevolent act. It is simply something that is going to happen and that the characters within your game, within your story, are going to have to try and thwart. They're going to have to try and prevent that from actually occurring. So it gives them a very clear purpose, a very clear outcome, but it also means that there's no adapting, there's no shifting, there's no changing of that outcome in terms of how it unfolds. An asteroid that's going to impact onto your planet is going to impact. If the players manage to get their characters onto that asteroid and blow the asteroid up, that's it. Game over. The world is saved. Your apocalyptic event has not occurred. If it is man-made or woman-made or any other made for that matter, if it is of a construct, so it is someone's plan, that means as the characters change or thwart that plan, the villain or the motivator behind this is going to adjust and adapt accordingly. So that means that you've got a much more complicated response to have to figure out as your characters, as your players change things as they are unfolding. So by determining whether it's natural, whether it's man-made, it gives us a very clear focus on where our attention needs to be. If it is man-made, if it is this plan, we then revert back to our usual storytelling techniques of why is this plan to bring about the apocalypse, how is it going to happen, and what are the stages and processes that we need to go through. That's absolutely fine. We also then need to obviously figure out how they're going to change as the characters interact. If it is a natural occurrence, we then change our focus. We then look at this from a perspective of how do we get our characters to at first realize that this is going to happen, to be those scientists who decode the strange seismic activity, to be the wizard who sees the aligning of the planets, to be that individual who starts to break the code that will ultimately lead to them discovering that it is the end times. So that becomes our focus more than if it's man-made. If it's man-made, we've got plenty of time. If it's natural-made, we've got other issues to deal with. So by separating the two out, it gives us a great perspective from which to start. It also means that, generally speaking, if it is man-made, if it is constructed, there is a very specific way in which it's going to happen, but it is also a very controlled way in which it's going to happen. A detonation at the center of the planet, a global spell that's going to erase all elves from existence. It's a very specific, usually it's fairly targeted. If it is a natural disaster, if it is a volcanic eruption or if it's an asteroid, there's going to be lots of alternative signs, lots of other options, other things that we can do to express that. And we're going to have to keep that in mind as well. So with Rising Destruction, this is what we now focus on, is how do we lead up to this apocalyptic event? Because remember, this might be a small series of adventures within your bigger campaign, or it could be your entire campaign. It depends on how you want to play it. So Ragnarok, for example, for example, how does Ragnarok express itself? How does it come about? How is the end time supposed to happen? Are there supposed to be bloody battles between brother and brother? Are there supposed to be this, or are there supposed to be that? Ragnarok is a bit of a tricky one because it's natural in a sense that it's the end times and that it's predicted, etc., etc. But it can be brought about, and we need to know how to express that. So we start to plot out a series of adventures, whether it's natural or whether it's man-made, as to how do we reveal that. With man-made, we are allowed to show to the players and the characters things that are happening in terms of being stolen, acquired, derailed. The characters themselves could be involved in bringing that about as well. They could be hired to steal a nuclear warhead that's going to get planted at the center of the planet. They could be required to deliver something, find Vestal virgins, however that might be. With a natural disaster, with a natural apocalyptic ending, we need to give them a similar idea, but it's portents and signs. It's birds flying in the wrong direction, or instead of flying in a V, they're flying in a giant skull shape. However you want to bring it about, your adventures, although they're trying to achieve the same thing, need to be plotted out in different ways. Let me clarify. In natural, let's start with natural. In a natural type of situation, it is the discovery and the slow revelation of what's happening. In man-made, it is the involvement in what is happening. And I know it's a little bit tricky to sort of think of those two in those different scales, but look at a disaster movie, for example, where you've got something like 2012. I think it was 2012, that disaster movie with John Cusack, where the world was just going to get flooded and destroyed, and so they were busy building these arks. They were seeing signs of seismic issues, helicopters freezing in midair, volcanoes in Yosemite Park blowing up, all those kinds of things. Those are the adventures that lead us towards the ultimate conclusion of them getting on a boat and being saved in my home country of South Africa and the Drakensberg, the mountain range down there, which is fantastic. Man-made, on the other hand, is things like Independence Day. You have this apocalyptic event happening, aliens are invading, and it is the humans who figure out the code. Then they figure out the next step. Then they figure out the next step. One is avoidable. The other one is fated to happen. Armageddon is an interesting one because it's a natural disaster. It's an asteroid that's going to smash into the Earth. So Ben Affleck and Bruce Willis hive-tail it off to go and blow up the asteroid. It's the human discovery of that impact and then the drama that plays out that we then follow. But the asteroid is going to impact regardless of what's going to happen. The aliens in Independence Day have to adapt and change as the air forces do things and change things around. Now, we need to show leaks and cracks. So random events versus deliberate actions. This is what I've been talking about this whole session. So with the random events, things need to take place that get the player's characters to discover the impending doom. Now, I think this for me is one of the big differentiators, is that with natural, the player characters are the ones who need to twig. They're the ones who need to make that discovery that the planets are aligning or that a volcano is going to erupt. In terms of man-made, it's deliberate. So things are happening and they're being involved in them and they're helping them along or they're thwarting them specifically. That, I think, may make sense. Does it? I don't know. It's tricky. So the idea of a natural discovery, they're in a cave system, they're fighting the trolls in the cave, and they start to see that there's lots of lava, and the trolls keep talking about their homes being flooded with fire, and that they are rising to the surface because of this flood of fire. the surface, they're on another adventure, and this normally calm valley is now suddenly a lake and has been filled because of earth tremors, which caused a dam higher up to collapse and flood the valley. These pieces, these random events, should start to be building that there is something coming. There is something going to happen. So then our PCs start to investigate. And that's where these random events, these things start to then come together. They start to make more sense. With man-made, with deliberate, they initially discover something is going to happen that's going to be very bad. So then they are actively working against it. They're they're trying to find the alien code. They're trying to build a spaceship that will get to the asteroid fast enough. So it's a slightly different pathway, discovery versus working actively against. I think that makes sense. So now, because you are running a apocalyptic event, obviously there's a certain amount of narrative steamrolling that needs to happen. Your game is not an apocalyptic game if the PCs can stop it. Now, I know this sounds very contrary to running a freeform game where PCs are involved in the narrative and in the story. Absolutely, the story the PCs are creating is how they go around trying to stop this thing, but the plot is that it will still happen, regardless. Your campaign idea is either that it terminates at the apocalyptic event, or that it continues afterwards, and that's the bulk of the campaign. I wouldn't necessarily have the apocalypse as being the main campaign. I don't see that as being... It doesn't really lend itself to playing out for that many sessions. It could, but I think it would be better as a show starter, and by show starter I mean as a campaign starter, or as a midpoint that changes the campaign from a happy place to a sad, desperate, negative place. And you'll see what happens a bit later on that one. But the idea here is that the PCs need victories. If you're going to play this out as a multi-adventure situation, the end of the world, literally, you need to give your PCs small victories. So they need to win. You need that yes, but, and no, and situation that I spoke about last week. You need that to come into play. The PCs see that the dam is going to collapse because of this earthquake that's ripped unnaturally through this normally calm area. So they go and they save the dam. They use their skills, they use their magic, they divert the water flow, they do this, they do that, they do the next thing. It's solved. Fantastic. Yay. They get that victory. So yes, they fix the dam. But what they don't know is that that earthquake that ripped open the hole in the wall anyway also ripped open a hole underground. And that the dam is now draining out of its natural enclosure and is now starting to flood that underground chamber, turning the area below not into a flooded wasteland, but into a marshy swamp full of quicksand and deadly traps and things. So yes, you succeeded in saving the dam, well done. But an adventure or two later, they discover that it has now turned into a marsh. Or they don't save the dam. The dam explodes and washes out, destroying and killing thousands of people. And whilst it's doing that, it reveals a much bigger rift has opened up underneath the dam, which would have caused that cataclysmic swamp to occur. So the players get they have their loss, they don't save the dam, but they discover a rift which will lead them to the next one. So there's still a sense of progress, there's still a sense of success, there's still a sense of discovery. So they need those. And why do they need those? Because an apocalyptic build-up where everything is just going wrong and the players' characters don't really have an effect on the outcome. Because remember, we've said that we have to railroad them to having this apocalypse. But it is the journey that the characters are going on that as they struggle against this apocalypse, as they fight against it, whether it's man-made or whether it's natural, whether they're trying to thwart those aliens or whether they are discovering this cataclysmic event that's going to occur, they need those victories. It just gives player morale a big boost, but it also feels like they're progressing and not just sitting there watching the whole thing unfold. Now, the reason I say that is because you could just run this as a little paragraph. If they have no influence over the outcome, you could just read a paragraph and then the world ended. it exploded and nothing that you tried to do made any difference. Now we move on to the next part of the adventure. You could do that, but I think that would feel very, very empty. Rather, let the characters go through some of the strife, go through the struggling, so that it makes their character backstories that much richer when we step into the post-apocalyptic section of your campaign and move forward. And yes, give them these small victories. If the villain is planning on using the moon to, I don't know, shift its alignment so that the planet's tidal forces flood New York City, well, let the characters get to the moon, but their starship blows up, so they're now stranded on the moon. That's a typical yes, but. Yes, you get to the moon, but your spaceship is inoperable once you land. So you're giving them those successes, you're letting them feel like they are moving forward, you're letting them do and make an impact. And shift it if it is this man-made disaster. If it's a natural disaster, let them discover more and more and more, which will empower them to overcome future issues. Now, as with almost all adventures, we need time frames. We need countdowns. Now, countdowns are very important, and this happens whether it's natural or man-made. We have to have that countdown, and the reason why we need to have that countdown is we need to put pressure on the PCs to perform. The players need to move forward. They can't vacillate between theories and ideas. We need to keep them moving. That's absolutely fine. However, we also mustn't paint ourselves into a corner. Players like to explore, they like to unpack, they like to go off on side missions, and they like to come back. So we need to build in delays and increases. And I think that's the wrong wording, actually. We need delays so that we can slow down the time frame, and we need increases so that we can shorten the time frame. So a delay might be that they stop that dam, and the dam, slowly that dam starts to drain, but instead of it flooding the valley, it muds up those caverns and things, and so it slows down. Or the dam drains into the volcano and cools the lava, so the volcanic eruption appears to be completely over. 4 months pass, the players go off and do another mission that they wanted to do because you've sensed as a GM that they're not too keen on this, or they really, really have struggled to save that dam, which has now become the running analogy. They have done that, and now they want to go shopping and they want to go and follow up one of the other quests. That's fine. Let them go and do that. The dam has delayed that countdown clock. But an adventure or two later, there's rumors that that old volcano is now starting to rumble again. Only this time far worse. It's as if someone put a cap on top of it, and now that cap is threatening to explode like an atomic bomb. So you've linked the solution now to your next adventure, and you've given your characters some opportunities to go off and explore other things. So you've built in a time frame delay. Similarly, if your characters are not focused on this apocalyptic event, if they don't really care, if they are, well, yeah, it's going to happen regardless of what we do. Okay, that's a different problem that you have at your table. But let's say, for example, that they've got too distracted, they've gone off to go and do some other things, and they don't feel that pressure. Escalate it. So the planets were aligning, but they had 3 weeks within which to try and change that outcome by casting a magical spell. They couldn't be bothered. They're not going to try that. What happens? The astronomer realizes that the calculations were wrong. And instead of them having 3 weeks, they've actually only got 2 weeks. Because the planets are actually, he forgot that they're moving like that. He thought it was just like that. So he's actually doubled the time that is actually available. So you can contract the time so you can put more pressure onto the PCs to make it happen. You can also similarly do that if your players don't seem too engaged with this apocalyptic ending. You might find it a fantastic, interesting series of adventures to really rip up and shake up your world. And we've seen MMOs do this often, where they take their old setting and they go, well, it's been 5 years, our subscriber base is down, let's blow up the planet and start again, or start a new phase in this new way. If you can increase the time frame, you then can cut out a whole bunch of adventures and move forward into your post-apocalyptic setting. So we need to keep that in our minds to be able to make that flexibility. So the event, as I've been saying now, this is where my points sometimes I get ahead of myself. Is it the focus? Is it the midpoint? Is it the end? If it's the end of your campaign, I would strongly advise that you have a way for the PCs to survive. If it is the end of a campaign and everybody dies, it will be very unsatisfying for the players, especially if their characters had no real way of having an impact. And we've established that you need to have it, basically, as a railroad to the end times. So if Ragnarok happens, the players' characters need to be able to prove that they are worthy of gaining entrance into Valhalla. You have to do that. You have to do that, because otherwise your players will just feel as if you just killed them all off. And I cannot tell you the amount of emails and messages I get from players saying, my GM just killed my character by saying you accidentally step off a cliff and die. Is that right? And the answer, I think, is a wholehearted no. What's the point of playing if that's the case? So if the focus is at the end of the game, make sure that the players' characters can survive. If it's the midpoint, that's fantastic. You've got your time delay factor that you can now use to make sure that it happens quickly if the players are not interested, or that it can extend if the players are interested and they're really trying to do stuff and they don't seem to be making any headway. If it isn't the focus, why bother going through the entire process anyway? If it is just an event that occurs, maybe make it one adventure, one giant epic film-like moment or adventure where it just plays out. So how long it plays out is entirely up to you, and it depends on whether it is in the midpoint, the focus, or not. Now, after the event is almost as critical as the event itself. So as that asteroid slams into the planet, as the planets align, as the nuclear device goes off, the player characters need to be somewhere where they can survive. If they are at ground zero and that impact goes off and they have been trying their best, but their dice rolls have been against them, their decisions at this last critical juncture have been incorrectly made, that impact, that finale, that giant explosion where they all die, you should end off your session by saying, and next week I want you to come with new characters that have survived this apocalypse. And we're going to carry on with that journey. If your players are interested, and they should be, because they've been building up to this moment, now they should be curious to see what happens next. If they're not, then you know, maybe an apocalyptic conclusion was not the best call to make. If they survive, though, and they really should, what is next? Next should be a series of adventures, and you can now start to decide the tone of your campaign. Is it hard survival? Is it an alien infestation? Is this alignment of the planets opening up portals that demons can now come pouring through? You need to know what's going to happen next so that you can tease that to your players. The dust settles, and as you rise, battered, bloodied, and bruised, you can see that demons are coming through a gate, or that it is a wasteland and survival is going to be harsh because there's no water in sight. However you want to do it, you've got to tease the next part, the next series of adventures. You've got to make sure that your players buy into that and that it's something that's really cool and really, really interesting. That is how you run an apocalyptic moment, in my opinion. Those are the steps you need to go through. Think about each of these points and go, yes, I need to focus on this. I need to give my players small victories so they don't feel overwhelmed. I need to give them cracks. I need to show them these things are happening. I need to decide if it's man-made or if it's demon-made or if it's natural or whatever the case might be. Anyway, I hope that these have been helpful, and a big shout out to World Anvil as we strive to move forward with our partnership with them. If you need someone to track out your apocalyptic campaign, World Anvil is really the way to go, and have a look at that at worldanvil.com. as our partner. Otherwise, join us on Facebook. You can find us there, How to Be a Great GM. We're on Twitter, which is How to GM, simply that. And on Twitter, you get notices of live role plays that I do every now and again. I've been joining the Save or Dice crew. That's with Talking 20 and company, Nerdarchy as well. Having a lot of fun with those guys and just exploring all the wonderful games that we have. So watch out for those on Twitter, announcements on Twitter. And until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.